You're an embarrassment. Don't come home. My father's words cut deeper than any surgical blade in his precious hospital. 5 years of silence followed, my name becoming taboo in the illustrious Marshall family. I built my life anyway, peace, by determined peace, until Your Honor preceded my name in courtrooms where my opinions became law. Then came the cream envelope with my brother's wedding invitation, my mother's secret rebellion. I told myself I was attending to prove them wrong, to stand tall in the success they never believed possible. What I didn't expect was Catherine, my brother's fiancée, curtsying before me at the rehearsal dinner, eyes wide with professional admiration as she said those world-shattering words, "Your Honor, I didn't know you'd be here." The room froze as recognition dawned on my brother's face, horror replacing arrogance as his perfect image crumbled. They'd tried to write me out of the family story. Now I would show them that the sister they discarded had become the judge they couldn't ignore. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The heavy cream envelope sat on my desk like an unexploded bomb. My clerk, Diane, had placed it there with my morning mail, probably assuming it was just another wedding invitation. But I recognized the ornate Marshall family crest, embossed in gold on the back flap immediately. 5 years of silence, and now, this, Judge Marshall? Diane poked her head in. Your 10 o'clock is ready. Thanks, I muttered, my fingers hovering over the envelope. I should have thrown it away unopened. Instead, I slipped it into my desk drawer and straightened my robe, pushing aside the sudden flood of memories that threatened to drown me. Later that evening, after a particularly difficult custody hearing, I finally opened it. The engraved invitation was exactly what I expected. James Anthony Marshall and Catherine Elizabeth Wilson requested the honor of my presence at their wedding. What I hadn't expected was the small handwritten note from my mother tucked inside. Ellie, please come. I miss you. Dad and James don't know I've sent this to you. Mom, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the same brand my grandfather used to drink. Old William Marshall was the only one who'd stood by me when I'd walked away from the family legacy of medicine. Eleanor, he'd said, some people are born to heal bodies. I think you were born to heal something else. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, the only true friend who'd stuck with me through everything. Did you get it? The invitation? Are you going? I took a large swallow of whiskey before responding. Haven't decided. Girl, you have to go. Walk in there with your head high. Judge Eleanor Marshall. Make them all eat their words. Easy for her to say. She hadn't been there for the Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago when James had stood up, glass in hand, and announced to our extended family that I was nothing but a disappointment, who would never contribute anything meaningful to this world. I opened my laptop and typed Catherine Wilson attorney into the search bar. Several results appeared, and I clicked on her profile at a public interest law firm. Her photo showed a woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Not the trophy, wife I'd expected James to choose. I scrolled through her case history and froze when I saw a familiar one. She'd appeared in my courtroom 8 months ago, representing a community center fighting eviction. I'd ruled in her favor. She'd thanked me formally, with no indication she recognized my last name. She hadn't known who I was then. But she would soon. The next day, I visited the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. His headstone was simple compared to the elaborate Marshall family monument nearby. I knelt and placed fresh flowers beside it. I don't know what to do. Grandpa, I whispered. Part of me wants to go just to see the look on James's face when he realizes what I've become. But another part. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead. I remembered the last time I'd seen my grandfather alive, in his hospital room. He'd pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. Open this when you're ready to face them again, he'd said. That envelope had remained in my desk drawer at home for 3 years. Perhaps it was finally time to read it. As I drove home, I passed the turnoff to Rosemont Estate, where the wedding would be held. My grandfather had taken me there for picnics as a child, pointing to the grand house on the hill. One day, Ellie, you'll make history, and places like this will be just footnotes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my grandfather's letter. His familiar, shaky handwriting filled the page with words of encouragement and belief in me. The final line read, "When the time comes to return, remember that true power isn't in making others feel small. It's in standing tall without pushing them down." I picked up my phone and sent my RSVP directly to my mother's email address. 4 words, "I'll be there, Eleanor." The day after sending my RSVP, I drove to my grandfather's house, now my house. Though I'd maintained it meticulously since inheriting it 3 years ago, I rarely ventured into his study. Today felt different. The study smelled of leather and pipe tobacco, just as it had when he was alive. I ran my fingers along the spines of his law books. My grandfather had been the only non-doctor in the family before me, though he'd never practiced law. "Too bull-headed for it," he'd always said with a wink. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a photo album I'd never seen before. The first page showed a young girl with braided pigtails standing next to a slightly older boy, both grinning widely as they held up fishing poles. James and me, age 7 and 10. Before everything changed. "You used to be my hero," I whispered, touching James's smiling face. We'd been close once. Before our father started taking James on hospital rounds, before the constant comparisons began, before James realized that aligning himself with our father's expectations was the path to approval. I flipped through more photos. Christmas mornings, summer vacations, school graduations. The progression was clear. In each successive photo, James and I stood farther apart. His smile grew more confident as mine became more forced. By my high school graduation, we were barely touching in the family photo, and my father's hand rested proudly on James's shoulder while I stood slightly apart with my grandfather. The album ended with my medical school white coat ceremony. My grandfather had taken the photo, the only reason I had a copy. My father beamed with pride, finally having both children following the Marshall legacy into medicine. If only he'd known what was coming. I closed the album and pulled out my laptop, opening the document where I kept my speech notes for difficult cases. There, encrypted among legal citations, was the journal I'd started keeping during my second year of medical school, the year everything fell apart. October 15th. Helped Sarah fight that slimeball landlord today. 3 hours in the law library, and we found the statute that saved her deposit. The look on her face when we won, that feeling was better than any diagnosis I've ever made. November 20th. Another cadaver lab today. Everyone else seems so engaged. All I feel is dread. Dr. Morris said I have gifted hands. Dad will be thrilled. But my heart isn't in this. December 3rd, overheard Dad and Dr. Bennett discussing how to document that post-op infection. They're covering for each other. Dad saw me listening and gave me the look, the one that says the Marshall reputation comes before everything. Even the truth. The final entry was the most painful. January 17th. Told them tonight. Mom cried. Dad. Went cold and silent. Worse than yelling. James called me selfish, said I was throwing away my birthright for a trendy whim. Only Grandpa understood. He hugged me and whispered, "Some cages are made of gold, Eleanor, but they're still cages." I closed my laptop and poured myself a drink. The memory of that night was still raw. My father's voice, deadly quiet. "If you walk away from medicine, you walk away from this family's financial support." And my response, trembling but determined, "Then I guess I'll be paying my own way." And I had. The next 3 years were a blur of part-time jobs, student loans, and tiny apartments with questionable heating. I ate ramen noodles and store brand, cereal while James completed his surgical residency in our father's department. I missed family holidays because I was working security at the mall or waiting tables at a diner. When I did attend, the conversation inevitably turned to James's accomplishments, with pointed silences where questions about my life should have been. By the time I graduated law school, I'd almost stopped caring. I sat in the audience at commencement, searching for familiar faces and finding none, until I spotted my grandfather in the back row, leaning on his cane but beaming with pride. "They're fools," he'd said afterward, hugging me tight. "But someday, they'll see what I see." He didn't live to witness my rise through the legal ranks, but his belief in me never wavered. During his final illness, I'd visit after court, still in my suit, and tell him about my cases. "You're going to be extraordinary," he'd whisper, his voice growing weaker each time. The Thanksgiving dinner that ended it all came 6 months after his death. I'd gone only because my mother had begged. She'd promised it would be just family, but I arrived to find the house full of extended relatives, colleagues from my father's hospital, and James's fellow surgeons. My father had gathered everyone for the annual donation to the Marshall Medical Foundation. One by one, family members announced their contributions. When it came to my turn, I had to admit I couldn't match their thousands. I was still paying off student loans, barely making rent as a public defender. James had stood then, smooth and handsome in his designer suit. "I think what my sister means to say is that some of us contribute to society while others just take." He'd raised his glass. "To the Marshall legacy. May some of us continue to uphold it." The silence that followed was deafening. I'd looked around the table at the faces of my family, some embarrassed, some smirking, none defending me, and realized this would never change. I'd placed my napkin beside my untouched pumpkin pie, stood up without a word, and walked out. Only now, staring at the wedding invitation on my desk, did I realize I'd been walking away ever since. The smell of fresh coffee filled my chambers as I reviewed case notes for the morning's hearing. On the wall hung my law school diploma, my bar admission certificate, and a photo of Judge Harriet Wells placing the judicial robe on my shoulders. No family photos, no Marshall heirlooms. This was my world now, built from scratch. "Judge Marshall?" My clerk knocked softly. "The Anderson custody case is ready." I nodded, rising and adjusting my robe. At 32, I was still mistaken for a law clerk sometimes. The youngest judge ever appointed in the district, and certainly the only Marshall, to wear this particular kind of black robe. The path here hadn't been easy. After law school, I'd clerked for Judge Wells, a formidable woman who'd broken her own glass ceilings. On my first day, she'd looked me over critically and said, "So you're William Marshall's granddaughter. He told me you were special. Don't prove him wrong." I never asked when she'd known my grandfather or why he'd contacted her. I just worked harder than everyone else, staying late to perfect memos other clerks dashed off in hours. When my clerkship ended, I joined Taylor & Woolcott, a mid-sized firm with a reputation for taking on difficult cases. My first day, senior, partner Richard Taylor had glanced up from his desk and asked, "Are you the new paralegal?" "No," I'd responded, extending my hand. "I'm Eleanor Marshall, your new associate." His expression had shifted from confusion to embarrassment. "Right, of course. Forgive me. It's just, you're younger than I expected." It was the first of many such interactions. In courtrooms, opposing counsel often assumed I was the assistant. In client meetings, questions were directed to my male colleagues. I learned to speak with a confidence I didn't always feel, to dress impeccably, to never show uncertainty. My breakthrough came 2 years in, with the Riverside Community Center case. A developer was attempting to force out a neighborhood anchor that served low-income families. The opposing counsel from a prestigious firm had smirked when I walked in alone. "Flying solo today, counselor?" Bold choice. 3 weeks later, After I'd uncovered permit violations and backroom deals through relentless research, his smirk was gone. The community center stayed open, and my name appeared in the local paper for the first time. I specialized in family law after that, drawn to cases where I could make tangible differences in people's lives. The pain of my own fractured family gave me insight into what was at stake in custody battles, elder care disputes, and adoption proceedings. My grandfather's final gift came after his death. His historic craftsman house on Maple Street, the only piece of family property my father hadn't inherited. The letter with the deed read simply, "Build your own legacy here." I'd moved in with my meager possessions, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room until I could afford proper furniture. Slowly, room by room, I'd made it mine while preserving its character. Now, 5 years later, it was the home I'd never had growing up in the cold, perfect Marshall mansion. Judge Wells called one afternoon with news that changed everything. "There's a judicial seat opening up. You should apply." I'd laughed. "I'm 31, Harriet." "Eleanor, listen to me. You have the right temperament, the right experience, and frankly, we need more women on the bench. At least consider it." The vetting process was grueling. Background checks, interviews, scrutiny of every case I'd ever handled. I dreaded the inevitable call to my family, but it never came. Years later, I learned Judge Wells had intervened, telling the committee, "I've known the Marshalls for decades. If you're checking Eleanor's character, look at her work, not her family name." The day of my swearing in, I stood alone at the courthouse steps, adjusting my new robe. No family in the audience, but the courtroom filled anyway. Clients I'd helped, colleagues who respected me, courthouse staff who'd seen my dedication. Judge Wells stood beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder as I took the oath. "I, Eleanor William Marshall, do solemnly swear." I'd taken my grandfather's name as my middle name, a private tribute he would have appreciated. After 2 years on the bench, I'd earned a reputation for fairness and thoroughness. The courthouse staff nicknamed me the Equalizer for my ability to cut through posturing and find balanced solutions. Lawyers knew better than to come to my courtroom unprepared. One particular case stood out from the rest, not because it was especially complex, but because of who argued it. A bright young attorney representing a community center fighting eviction. She'd presented her case with passion and precision, citing precedents I'd established in similar cases. "Ms. Wilson," I'd said after her argument, "your preparation is commendable." Catherine had thanked me with a professional smile, collecting her papers with efficient movements. "Your Honor is known for expecting thorough work." She'd had no idea who I was beyond the robe and gavel. No idea that the judge she was addressing was her future sister-in-law. No idea that in 8 months she would stand in a garden at Rosemont Estate and unwittingly drop a bomb on her own wedding rehearsal. Courthouse hallways were notorious for gossip. As I walked to my chambers, I overheard 2 clerks whispering about that Wilson attorney who had impressed Judge Marshall again. I slowed my pace, listening without appearing to. "She won the Hartman case, too," one said. "Used the judge's own precedent from Davis v. Mercer County." "Smart move," the other replied. "Marshall appreciates when attorneys do their homework." I continued walking, a small smile playing at my lips. Catherine Wilson was developing quite a reputation in our courthouse, and apparently she'd been studying my rulings. Perhaps she wasn't just a convenient connection for James's career advancement after all. 2 weeks later, I encountered Catherine directly at the annual Legal Aid Foundation benefit. I was there because I believed in the cause. Presumably, she was too. She stood across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a senior partner from a firm I recognized. She wore a simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a professional knot. Nothing like the glamorous socialites James had dated in college. I was contemplating a discreet exit when Catherine looked up and noticed me. Her face brightened with recognition, and before I could retreat, She was walking toward me. "Judge Marshall," she said warmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Ms. Wilson," I nodded. "I try to support legal aid when I can. Your ruling in the Grantham eviction case last month was cited in our staff meeting as a model approach." Her eyes shone with genuine admiration. "The balancing test you outlined for community impact versus property rights was brilliant." "Thank you," I responded, unsure how to handle praise from my brother's fiancée. "Your arguments in that community center case were equally impressive." She beamed at the compliment. "That means a lot coming from you. I've followed your career since law school, actually. Your article on rehabilitative approaches in family court was what inspired me to focus on community law." The irony was almost too much. I searched her face for any sign that she knew who I was beyond my judicial role, but found none. Either Catherine was an extraordinary actress, or James had never shown her a family photo, or perhaps never mentioned he had a sister at all. Just as I was struggling with how to respond, a colleague called her name from across the room. "I should go," she said apologetically. "But I hope we can speak again sometime, Your Honor. I'd love to hear more about your approach to mediation in property disputes." She hurried away, leaving me with my champagne and my thoughts. What exactly? Had James told her about his family? About me? Over the next few months, Catherine appeared in my courtroom twice more. Each time, her legal work was exceptional, her manner professional. Outside court, at legal events, she would greet me with respect, but maintain appropriate distance. Never once did she indicate any knowledge of my connection to James. My curiosity eventually got the better of me. Using my judicial access, I ran a background check on Catherine Elizabeth Wilson. Her record was impressive. Graduated with honors from Georgetown Law, clerked for a respected federal judge, turned down lucrative firm offers to work in public interest law. Her cases focused on housing rights, community preservation, and elder law, issues that affected real people, not corporations. In other words, she was nothing like what I would have expected from James's partner. My brother had always gravitated toward people who enhanced his image. Beautiful, connected, wealthy, with prestigious family names. Catherine seemed to care about none of that. At a judicial conference in April, we ended up seated at the same table for lunch. After some general conversation with our table mates, Catherine turned to me directly. "Judge Marshall, may I ask your advice on something?" "Of course," I replied, curious. "I'm getting married in a few months," she said, twisting her engagement ring nervously. "And my fiancé's family is, well, they're very traditional. Accomplished. The kind of people who've had the same Christmas dinner menu for 5 generations." I nearly choked on my water. "That sounds challenging." "It is," she sighed. "I come from a completely different background. My parents are teachers. We ate pizza on paper plates for special occasions." She smiled ruefully. "I'm terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing." The universe's sense of humor was truly twisted. Here was Catherine, worried about fitting in with my family, asking me, the black sheep they'd rejected, for advice. "In my experience," I said, carefully, "families like that care most about authenticity. Be yourself, not who you think they want you to be." She looked relieved. "That's actually very helpful. My fiancé keeps giving me these complex instructions about how to act, who to impress. It's exhausting." "Sounds like he's the one who's nervous," I observed, wondering what James had told her about the illustrious Marshalls. "He is," she admitted. "He talks about his family like they're royalty, but then gets weird when I ask questions, like he's hiding something." She suddenly looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be bothering you with personal matters." "It's fine," I assured her, fighting the urge to tell her everything. Wedding stress affects everyone differently. As she thanked me and turned to speak with another table mate, I wondered what James would say if he knew his fiancée had just confided in the sister he'd written off as a failure. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. I nearly declined when I saw the number, but something made me answer. Eleanor? Her voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. You're coming to the wedding? I RSVP'd, I replied carefully. Yes. I got your email. She paused. It's just, your father doesn't know I invited you. Neither does James. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. So you want me to stay away after all? No. The forcefulness of her response surprised me. No, Eleanor. I want you there. I've missed you terribly. It's just, it might be a shock for them. Good, I said before I could stop myself. She was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, please don't come looking for a fight. I'm not, I said truthfully. But I'm not coming to pretend. Everything's fine either. Fair enough, she conceded. Will you have dinner with me next week? Just us? The request caught me off guard. In 5 years, my mother had made minimal effort to maintain contact, occasional birthday cards, generic Christmas greetings. But something in her voice sounded different now. Determined. All right, I agreed. Tuesday at Salvatore's, 7 o'clock. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the restaurant early, choosing a quiet corner table. My mother appeared precisely on time, looking both familiar and strange. Her hair had more gray than I remembered, and her designer clothes hung a bit looser, on her frame. Eleanor, she said, reaching for my hands across the table. You look wonderful. Thank you, I replied, allowing the brief contact before withdrawing my hands. You look well. An awkward silence fell as we studied our menus. After ordering, my mother took a deep breath. I've been following your career, she said quietly. The Brennan case last year, the reform proposals for the juvenile system. I've read everything I could find. I stared at her, speechless. Your father doesn't know, she continued. He still doesn't. He hasn't been able to accept that I'm not a doctor, I finished for her. That's been clear for a decade, Mom. She flinched but nodded. Yes, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Eleanor. Extremely proud. What you've accomplished on your own. Is it really on my own when Grandpa left me his house and helped fund my last semester? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Your grandfather believed in you, she said simply. As he should have. As we all should have. The waiter arrived with our wine, giving me a moment to collect myself. My mother had never spoken to me like this before, not when I'd left medical school, not when I'd graduated law school, not even after I was appointed to the bench. Why now, Mom? I asked finally. She toyed with her napkin. Catherine, she said. James's fiancée. She's not what I expected. That made 2 of us. How? So? She asks questions. About everything. My mother gave a small, bemused smile. About the family history, traditions, even that horrible portrait of great-grandfather in the dining room. She noticed there were gaps in the family stories James tells. What does he say about me? I couldn't help asking. My mother's expression tightened. He tells people you couldn't handle medical school, that you had a breakdown and left. The familiar anger flared, but I pushed it down. And Dad? He doesn't correct him. She looked ashamed. Neither did I, until recently. I raised an eyebrow. Recently? Catherine found an old photo album. You were in several pictures. She asked who you were. My mother took a large swallow of wine. I told her the truth, that you're a judge now, and that we don't speak much. Because of family disagreements. I imagined Catherine's confusion, trying to reconcile the successful judge with James's story of the failure who couldn't cut it. No wonder she'd seemed so interested in my career, yet oblivious to our connection. Does she know I'll be at the wedding? I asked. No, my mother admitted. James still thinks you won't come. He told everyone you declined. So I'll be the surprise guest, I said dryly. Our food arrived, and we ate in contemplative silence for a few minutes before my mother spoke again. Eleanor, there's something else you should know. She set down her fork. Your father had a health scare last month. Nothing serious. Angina, they said. But it changed things between us. How? So? I told him I've been miserable about how we've treated you, that I want my daughter back in my life. Her voice cracked slightly. He didn't agree, exactly, but he didn't forbid it either. That's progress, for him. I considered her words, unsure how to feel. For years, I'd nursed my anger against both my parents equally. My father for his cold rejection, my mother for her passive acceptance of it. Now she was extending an olive branch, however belated. I'm not looking for a big emotional reunion, I said finally. But I won't hide who I am or what I've accomplished either. She nodded. That's fair. As we finished our meal, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. This was your grandfather's, she said, sliding it across the table. James has been wearing it, but it was meant for you. I opened the box to find my grandfather's pocket watch, the one he'd always promised would be mine someday. The gold case was engraved with his initials, WJM, and inside was a small photo of him with me at my law school graduation. How did you get this? I asked, my voice thick. I took it from James's dresser, she admitted, a flash of defiance in her eyes. He never appreciated what it meant. I closed my fingers around the watch, feeling its solid weight. Thank you. Eleanor, my mother said as we prepared to leave, whatever happens at this wedding, just know that not everyone in this family feels the same way about you. I drove home that night with my grandfather's watch in my pocket and my mother's words echoing in my mind. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Dress shopping tomorrow. No arguments. If you're facing the firing squad, you're doing it in something fabulous. I smiled despite myself. Maybe she was right. If I was walking back into the lion's den, I might as well look spectacular doing it. The week before the wedding, I alternated between determination and doubt, packing and unpacking my overnight bag, rehearsing calm responses to potential provocations. The night before I was due to drive to Rosemont Estate, I sat in my grandfather's favorite armchair, holding his watch and rereading his final letter to me. Sometimes the hardest road leads to the most beautiful view, he'd written. Tomorrow, I would find out if he was right. The winding road to Rosemont Estate was exactly as I remembered from my childhood. Tall oaks creating dappled shadows across the pavement, the wrought iron gates standing open in welcome. As I drove through, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The last time I'd been here was for my grandfather's 75th birthday, 3 years before his death. James had spent that entire event telling his medical school friends about a complex surgery he'd observed, while I refilled drink trays and pretended not to hear my father explaining to relatives that I was still finding my way. Now, I returned, not as a confused dropout, but as Judge Eleanor Marshall. My black sedan looked plain next to the luxury cars parked along the circular drive, but I didn't care. I touched my grandfather's pocket watch in my jacket, drawing strength from it before stepping out. The estate's gardens were in full bloom, transformed with white tents, flower arrangements, and strings of lights for tomorrow's wedding. I heard voices and laughter coming from the east lawn, where the rehearsal would take place. Eleanor? My mother materialized from a side path, wearing an expensive blue dress that matched her anxious eyes. You came. I said I would. I accepted her hesitant embrace, noting how she glanced nervously toward the lawn. Has anyone noticed I'm here yet? No, she whispered. Your father's inside with the caterers. James is with the wedding planner. By the ceremony site. She squeezed my arm. You look beautiful, dear. Maya had insisted on the forest green dress. It brings out your eyes and screams, "I'm successful without trying." I'd paired it with simple gold jewelry and heels just high enough to feel powerful without sacrificing comfort. Judge's instinct: never wear shoes you can't walk confidently in. "Eleanor Marshall, is that you?" My cousin Abigail approached, her expression a mixture of shock and curiosity. "Mom said you weren't coming." "Change of plans," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, this is... wow." She adjusted her designer handbag nervously. "Are James and Uncle Robert?" "Not yet," I replied, enjoying her discomfort a little too much. More relatives noticed me as we made our way toward the lawn. Aunt Susan nearly spilled her champagne. Uncle Thomas did a comical double-take. Two of my father's colleagues whispered behind their hands. I kept my chin high, acknowledging their surprised greetings with polite nods. Ahead, I could see James directing a florist, gesturing emphatically at an arch of white roses. He looked the same, handsome in that polished way, his movements confident and entitled. I took a deep breath, preparing for the confrontation, but it was Catherine I spotted first. She stood slightly apart from the wedding party, checking something on her phone. She wore a simple white sundress, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. When she looked up and saw me, her face transformed with genuine delight. "Your Honor," she called, hurrying toward me. The conversations around us quieted as heads turned to watch. Catherine approached with a slight, respectful curtsy, a charming habit I'd noticed in my courtroom. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent lawn. James whipped around, his expression changing from confusion to shock to horror in the span of seconds. Our eyes locked over Catherine's shoulder. "Judge Marshall is a family friend?" Catherine continued, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air. "Not exactly," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on my brother. James strode toward us, his face draining of color. "Eleanor," he said flatly. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I replied. I RSVP'd. Catherine looked between us, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You two know each other?" "You could say that," James answered, his voice tight. "Eleanor is my daughter," my mother interjected, moving to stand beside me. "James's sister." Catherine's mouth fell open. "Sister?" She turned to James. "You told me your sister couldn't handle medical school and disappeared. That she was..." She stopped herself, but we all heard the unspoken word. Disappointment. "I didn't disappear," I said calmly. "I became a judge." "Wait." Catherine's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Judge Marshall is your sister? The same? Judge Marshall who's being considered for the federal bench?" The silence that followed felt heavier than any courtroom hush. Family members and wedding guests had abandoned all pretense of not listening, forming a loose circle around us. James attempted a dismissive laugh that came out more like a cough. "Elle always did have unconventional ideas about success." "Unconventional?" Catherine's voice rose slightly. "Judge Marshall's rulings on the Bennett housing case are being cited in law schools. Her juvenile justice reforms have become a model for 3 other states." "Yes, well," James shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose law has its place, though it's hardly..." "Hardly what, James?" I interrupted, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Hardly saving lives? Because that's what you were about to say, isn't it? That's always been the family line. Unless you're healing bodies, you're not doing anything that matters." My father chose that moment to emerge from the house, stopping short when he saw me. For an instant, I was 12 years old again, awaiting his judgment. Then I remembered the robe I wore every day, the gavel I wielded, the lives I'd changed. With my decisions. "Dad," James called, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Did you know about this?" My father approached slowly, looking older than I remembered. "Your mother mentioned the possibility." he said carefully. His eyes assessed me with clinical precision. You look well, Eleanor. Thank you, I replied, neither warm nor cold. I'm well? Catherine was still staring at James, her expression hardening. You told me your sister was a troubled dropout. You never once mentioned she was Judge Eleanor Marshall. I didn't think it was relevant, James muttered. Not relevant? Catherine's voice rose again. James, I've been studying her cases since law school. I argued in her courtroom. I've cited her opinions in my briefs. A ripple of whispers spread through the onlookers. Someone, I think it was Uncle Thomas, let out a low whistle. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, my father suggested, looking around at the growing audience. Why? I asked. James didn't feel the need for privacy when he announced to everyone at Thanksgiving dinner that I was nothing but a disappointment who would never contribute anything meaningful to this world. James flinched. That was 5 years ago, Eleanor. And you did walk out on a prestigious medical career that most people would kill for. I walked out on a path that wasn't mine, I corrected him. Just like Grandpa did when he chose business over medicine. That was different, my father interjected. Was it? I countered. Or was it only acceptable because he was a man making his own choice, while I was just a girl who should do as she was told? My father had no answer for that. Catherine, however, wasn't finished. She turned to James, removing her engagement ring with deliberate movements. I need some time to think, she said quietly, placing the ring in his palm. This isn't just about your sister, James. It's about you lying to me, about who you are, who your family is. She looked at me, then back at him. If you could lie about something so fundamental, what else haven't you told me? Without waiting for an answer, she walked away toward the guest house. James stared after her, then at the ring in his hand, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. Are you satisfied? Now? He asked me bitterly. You've managed to ruin my wedding before it even happened. I didn't do this, James, I said quietly. Your own dishonesty did. He stormed off toward the main house, leaving me standing with my parents and a circle of stunned relatives. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my mother spoke. I think, she said with remarkable composure, we could all use some refreshment. Dinner will be served in 30 minutes. As the crowd dispersed, my father remained, studying me with an unreadable expression. You've done well for yourself, he said finally, the closest thing to approval I'd heard from him in a decade. Yes, I agreed simply. I have. The rehearsal dinner that evening was a study in awkward silences and forced conversation. James didn't appear until the soup course, his face set in grim lines. Catherine remained absent entirely. I sat between my mother and Aunt Susan, fielding questions about my interesting career choice from relatives who suddenly seemed fascinated by the legal system. So you actually send people to jail? Uncle Thomas asked, as if I'd admitted to an exotic hobby. When appropriate, I replied, sipping my water, though much of my docket involves civil matters, property disputes, custody arrangements, business conflicts. Eleanor specialized in family law before taking the bench, my mother added with unexpected pride. She was known for finding solutions where others saw only problems. I glanced at her, surprised by the specific knowledge. Perhaps she really had been following my career all along. James picked at his food, barely participating in the conversation until one of his groomsmen, a fellow surgeon named David, made an ill-advised attempt to lighten the mood. Well, who would have thought? The black sheep became the star. He raised his glass with a grin. To Judge Marshall. Please don't, I said quietly, but several guests had already lifted their glasses. James set down his fork with a clatter. She's not a star, he said coldly. She quit. When medicine got too difficult, she walked away. Let's not pretend dropping out is something to celebrate. The table fell silent again. I counted to 10 in my head, a technique I used when facing particularly difficult attorneys in my courtroom. I didn't quit because medicine was too difficult, James, I said evenly. I quit because it wasn't my calling. There's a difference. A calling, he scoffed. What does that even mean? Medicine is the Marshall family legacy. A legacy you guarded jealously, I observed. Remember when we were kids and I got a higher score on that science project? You didn't speak to me for a week. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in my words. James had always needed to be the best, the favorite, the one destined for greatness. That's absurd, he protested. I was supportive of you until you threw everything away. An unexpected voice joined the conversation, my father's. That's not entirely true, James, he said quietly. You were competitive with your sister from an early age. Your mother and I probably encouraged that too much. James stared at our father, visibly stunned by this betrayal. What are you saying? That it's my fault she quit? No, my father replied. I'm saying we all played a part in what happened, including me. He looked at me directly, perhaps especially me. The admission hung in the air, as surprising to me as to everyone else at the table. My father, Dr. Robert Marshall, who had never admitted error in his life, was acknowledging his role in our family's fracture. The best man cleared his throat. Maybe we should talk about something else? The weather's supposed to be perfect for the ceremony. Tomorrow! If there is a ceremony, muttered one of the bridesmaids, not quite under her breath. There will be, James insisted, though uncertainty flashed in his eyes. Catherine just needs time to cool off. This is all just overwhelming for her. I excused myself shortly after the main course, needing air and space. The night was warm, stars visible above the estate's gardens. I found a stone bench near a reflecting pool, my grandfather's favorite spot, and sat down, fingering his pocket watch in my jacket pocket. I thought I might find you here, said a voice behind me. Catherine emerged from the shadows, still, in her white sundress. Your mother mentioned it was a special place for your grandfather. It was, I confirmed, making room for her on the bench. How are you holding up? She sat down with a heavy sigh. Honestly? I don't know. 24? Hours ago, I thought I understood my life. Now, I'm sorry, I offered. It wasn't my intention to disrupt your wedding. It wasn't you, she said firmly. It was James. All this time. She shook her head. I can't believe I didn't see it. The way he always redirected conversations about his family, the missing photos, the inconsistencies in his stories. She paused. May I ask you something, Judge Marshall? Eleanor, I corrected gently. And yes. What was he like? Growing up, I mean. Was he always so driven, competitive, eager for approval? I suggested. Yes, but he could also be kind. When I had strep throat in 4th grade, he read me stories. For hours. When his friends made fun of my braces, he defended me. I looked across the dark garden. James isn't a villain, Catherine. He's just human. Flawed. Desperate to be the perfect son, even when it meant pushing me into the role of the imperfect one. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. I've spent 2 years with a man who couldn't be honest about something as fundamental as his relationship with his sister. What does that say about our future? I had no answer for her. We sat in companionable silence until she stood to leave. Thank you, she said, for your honesty, and for your rulings in the Westside Community Center case. That place houses the after-school program that saved me when I was a kid with nowhere to go. She walked away toward the guest house, leaving me to contemplate how many lives I'd touched without realizing it, and how many James had saved that I would never know about. Perhaps we'd both found our callings after all. Morning light filtered through the curtains of my guest room, waking me earlier than I would have liked. After a restless night, I dressed in casual clothes and slipped outside for a walk, hoping to clear my head before facing the day's inevitable tensions. The estate grounds were quiet, staff not yet arrived to prepare for the now uncertain wedding. I followed a familiar path down to the small pond where my grandfather had taught me to fish, surprised to find Catherine sitting on the dock, her feet dangling above the water. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, joining her. She shook her head. "I've been out here for hours thinking." We sat in silence, watching a family of ducks glide across the water's surface. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest. What kind of man is your brother, really?" I considered my answer carefully. Ambitious, proud, desperate for approval, especially from our father. Sometimes arrogant. I paused. But also brilliant, dedicated to his patients, capable of great compassion when it matters most. "Is he the man I thought I was marrying?" she pressed. "Only you can answer that," I replied. "But I will say this, people are rarely all good or all bad. James created a narrative about me that was unfair and untrue. That was wrong. But it came from his own insecurities, not malice." Catherine twisted her hands in her lap. "He came to the guest house last night. We talked until dawn. And he admitted everything. How he'd built himself up by diminishing you, how he'd been terrified I would think less of him if I knew his sister was more successful." She sighed. He seemed genuinely sorry. For the first time since I've known him, he was completely vulnerable. No pretense, no performance. "That doesn't sound like the James I know," I admitted. "People can change," she said softly. "If they want to badly enough." "Do you believe he wants to?" "I think so," she nodded. "But I also told him I needed time, that the wedding should be postponed." Before I could respond, a commotion rose from the direction of the main house. A staff member was running toward us. "Ms. Wilson, Judge Marshall. It's Dr. Marshall, the elder one. He's collapsed." We rushed to the house, finding my father seated in an armchair in the library, my mother hovering, anxiously nearby. A young man I recognized as one of James's medical colleagues was taking his pulse. "It's just angina," my father insisted, though his face was pale. "No need for all this fuss." "We've called an ambulance anyway," my mother said firmly. "Robert, please don't argue." James burst into the room, medical bag in hand. "What happened?" he demanded, immediately switching into doctor mode. "Your father experienced chest pain while climbing the stairs," the colleague explained. "His pulse is slightly irregular, but stable." James knelt beside our father, taking over the examination with practiced efficiency. I stood back, feeling suddenly out of place in this medical scene, until my father's eyes found mine over James's shoulder. "Eleanor," he called weakly. "Come here, please." Surprised, I approached the chair. My father reached out and took my hand in his, the first time he had touched me in 5 years. "I may not have another chance to say this," he began. "Don't be dramatic, Dad," James interrupted. "Your vitals are stabilizing already." "Be quiet, James," my father said with unexpected sharpness. "I need to speak to your sister." His eyes, so like my own, held mine steadily. "I was wrong, Eleanor. Wrong to push you into a path that wasn't yours. Wrong to withdraw my support when you found your own way." I stared at him, speechless. "Your grandfather told me I would regret it," he continued. "The day after that Thanksgiving dinner, he came to my office and said, 'You're going to be asking for her forgiveness someday, Robert. I just hope you do. It before it's too late.'" He squeezed my hand. "I hope it's not too late." The ambulance arrived before I could formulate a response. As the paramedics prepared to transport my father, James pulled me aside. "This doesn't change anything," he said, but the usual edge was missing from his voice. "Doesn't it?" I countered. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood that it almost made me smile. I don't know how to do this, Eleanor. How to be wrong. It gets easier with practice, I assured him. Trust me, I issue rulings I later question all the time. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Always so sure of yourself. Hardly, I admitted. But I've learned to live with uncertainty. It's part of being human. My mother approached, her face drawn with worry. They're taking your father to Memorial Hospital. I'm going with him. She hesitated. Will you both come? Together? James and I exchanged a glance, decades of competition and hurt flowing between us, but also the faint memory of being allies once, long ago. I'll drive, I offered. The 3 hours we spent in the hospital waiting room were awkward, but not hostile. James explained the tests they were running on our father. I helped my mother fill out insurance forms, my legal training making quick work of the complicated documents. When the doctor emerged to report that my father was stable and would be discharged with medication adjustments, we shared a moment of collective relief. That evening, back at Rosemont Estate, I found my mother in the family study, looking through old photo albums. I've kept these hidden for years, she confessed, showing me a page of newspaper clippings about my cases. Your father. It was easier not to remind him. And now? I asked. Now I'm done hiding, she said with newfound firmness. I've missed too much of your life already, Eleanor. As I turned the pages of her scrapbook, I was stunned by how comprehensive it was. Articles, photographs, even transcripts of some of my more noteworthy decisions. All this time, I'd thought she'd been completely disinterested in my career. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. She looked down, ashamed. I wasn't brave enough to stand up to your father, or to James. She met my eyes again. But seeing you walk in yesterday, so confident, so accomplished, I've never been prouder, Eleanor. Never. Later that night, a knock came at my guest room door. James stood in the hallway holding something in his hand. Grandfather's watch, he said, holding it out to me. Mom told me she took it from my room. But the truth is, I knew it was meant for you. I took it after the funeral because I was angry, jealous of what you had with him. I accepted the watch, running my thumb over the worn gold case. He loved you too, James. Not the way he loved you, James said without bitterness. He saw something in you that the rest of us missed. He paused. Catherine has decided to postpone the wedding. She says we need time to rebuild trust. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He shrugged. It's better than canceling it altogether, which is what I probably deserve. He turned to go, then stopped. The federal bench nomination? Is it true? It's been discussed, I acknowledged. Nothing official yet. You'd be good at it, he said simply, the first professional compliment he'd ever given me. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It wasn't even reconciliation. But as I closed my door and placed my grandfather's watch on the nightstand, I thought perhaps it was a beginning. All rise. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Marshall presiding. 1 year after the wedding that wasn't, I entered my expanded chambers at the federal courthouse. The black robe felt heavier, the responsibility greater, but the sense of purpose remained the same. My clerk handed me the day's docket as I settled behind the bench. First case, I announced. Wilson Community Legal Services versus Northland Development Corporation. Catherine entered with confident steps, leading a small team of attorneys. Her firm, established 6 months earlier with seed funding from an anonymous donor, my mother, though Catherine didn't know it, had quickly gained a reputation for effective advocacy on behalf of underserved communities. Your Honor, she began, her eyes meeting mine with professional respect, but no hint of awkwardness. After the postponed wedding had become a canceled one, Catherine and I had maintained a cautious friendship, based initially on professional admiration and eventually on genuine liking. The case proceeded smoothly, both sides presenting strong arguments. During a brief recess, Catherine approached the bench. "Judge Marshall," she said formally, then lowered her voice. "Eleanor, I wanted to tell you before you heard it elsewhere. James called me last night." My eyebrow raised involuntarily. "Oh?" "He's back from his second tour with Doctors Without Borders," she explained. "He sounds different, more grounded. After the non-wedding and our father's health scare, James had shocked everyone by taking a leave of absence from his prestigious surgical position to volunteer in underserved regions. The brother I knew would never have sacrificed career advancement for humanitarian work. Perhaps people really could change. Are you considering—" I left the question unfinished. "Getting back together?" "No," she said firmly. "That ship has sailed. But I think we might be able to be friends someday. He's growing up finally." The bailiff announced the end of recess, and Catherine returned to her table. I watched her organize her notes with methodical precision, remembering how she'd once been so worried about impressing the Marshall family. Now she stood confidently on her own merits, advocating for others with quiet authority. That evening, I joined my parents for dinner at their home, a monthly tradition we'd established gradually over the past year. The Grand Marshall house felt different now, less imposing, with many of the more ostentatious furnishings replaced by my mother's choices rather than generations of tradition. "Eleanor," my father greeted me at the door, his embrace still slightly awkward but genuine. His health scare had softened him, forced him to reconsider priorities that once seemed immutable. "How was court today?" my mother asked as we settled. At the dining table. No longer in the formal dining room, but in the sun-filled breakfast nook she preferred. "Interesting," I replied. "Catherine's new case against Northland Development is strong." "That reminds me," my father said. "I have a medical ethics question I wanted your opinion on. A colleague is dealing with a situation involving confidentiality and potential public health concerns." As he outlined the case, I marveled at how much had changed. A year ago, my father would never have considered my opinion on anything remotely medical. Now, he regularly sought my legal perspective on ethical questions facing his department. After dinner, my mother pulled me into her study, formerly my father's domain, now transformed with her artwork and photographs. "I have news," she said, excitement brightening her face. "I've been asked to join the board of the Legal Aid Foundation. Apparently, someone spoke very highly of my commitment to justice." She gave me a knowing look. I smiled innocently. "Can't imagine who that might have been." "I know it was you," she said, squeezing my hand. "Thank you for believing I could be more than just a doctor's wife." As I drove home that night, my phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, a rare occurrence despite our cautious moves toward reconciliation. "Eleanor," he said when I answered. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I replied, putting the call on speaker. "How was Doctors Without Borders?" "Humbling," he admitted. "Turns out I'm not the greatest surgeon in the world when I'm working in a tent with minimal equipment." He paused. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I'm considering a change in specialization, focusing on developing surgical techniques for low-resource environments." "That sounds meaningful," I said, genuinely impressed. "It is, but it would mean stepping away from the career path Dad always envisioned, taking a research position instead of becoming chief of surgery." I understood immediately. "And you want to know how to tell him?" "You've had practice disappointing him," James said. Then quickly added, "Sorry, that came out wrong." I know what you meant," I assured him. "Here's my advice. Tell him directly. Explain your reasons and then give him time to process. He's not the same man he was 5 years ago, James." "Thanks," he said simply. "By the way, I heard about the Supreme Court shortlist. Congratulations." "It's just a rumor at this point," I demurred, though my name had indeed been mentioned for the state Supreme Court. "Well, Grandfather would be proud, James said. He always knew you'd make history. Later that week, I visited the cemetery, kneeling beside my grandfather's grave with a copy of my latest judicial opinion. The spring breeze rustled the pages as I placed them against his headstone. "You were right about making history, Grandpa," I said softly. "But you were wrong about one thing. I didn't prove them wrong. I proved you right." As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Coffee with James, 10 a.m. Our monthly meeting, established after months of tentative text exchanges, had become a cautious tradition. Not quite friendship, not quite the closeness we'd had as children, but something new we were building together. In my car, I opened the glove compartment and removed an envelope containing the letter my grandfather had left me. I'd read it so many times the creases were wearing thin, but certain lines still resonated with particular power. "Eleanor, remember that true power isn't in making others feel small. It's in standing tall without pushing them down. The family. Legacy isn't medicine or law or any particular profession. It's integrity. It's courage. It's doing what's right even when it's difficult. By that measure, my dear girl, you are the greatest marshal of them all." I tucked the letter away, started my car, and drove toward the future. Not the one my father had planned for me, or even the one I had imagined for myself, but one I had built decision by decision, choice by choice. My own legacy, written in my own hand. I touched my grandfather's pocket watch, now a permanent fixture in my jacket pocket, and smiled. The view was beautiful indeed. What would you do if the family that rejected you suddenly had to face your success? Could you find forgiveness? Or would you choose vindication? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of family, redemption, and reclaiming your power resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more emotional journeys. New stories posted every day.